Today we have Ben Orenstein. He's the founder of Tuple, a tool that enables developers to program together. And he's also the host of The Art of Product, which is a great podcast. Listen to it all the time. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about enterprise sales. So Ben, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, cool. Do you want to give us a quick rundown of Tuple and the product and your customers?
Yeah, sure. Tuple is a Mac OS app for doing remote pair programming. I built it with my two co-founders. We started about 3 years ago, and we created it because we weren't really happy with the generic pair programming tools, or I guess just generic screen sharing tools, more accurately, that were on the market. So I had done pairing via things like Slack calls or Zoom or Meet or things like that, and just felt like, I think a native app that was tailored towards people like me that cared a lot about usability and speed and resource consumption would be a useful product. And so we quit our jobs and went after it and built that thing, and that's who we are today.
Nice. So digging into the product a little bit, can you tell us what are some of those usability things that make it perfect for that job?
So one is just that we thought a lot about how do you do remote control well. We wanted one of our guiding principles was it should feel like you're sitting at that machine and plugged into it with just an extra mouse and extra keyboard. And so anything that got in the way of that illusion was something we tried to eliminate. We just thought a lot about what would work well for pairing in particular. So remote control is important. Also, quality is really important. So these web-based tools and even some of the native tools don't put as much emphasis on screen share quality. So for us, we prioritize the bandwidth for the screen share, and we use a fair amount of it to deliver really high-quality screen share because developers tend to have a lot of code on the screen, and often they're using small text sizes, and the difference between a pipe and a forward slash is essential.
Right. So is the idea that you're trying to simulate that experience where there is literally one keyboard and one mouse, and you're handing it back and forth?
Having your own keyboard is definitely part of the idea. But yeah, if everyone could pair in person in the world, I would say that we probably don't need a company like ours. Like it'd be great. Obviously, with remote work, not possible. Even in-person settings, it can be nice to stay at your own desk. I might want my own comfy chair. I might want all that desk space. I might have had onions for lunch. There's reasons where having a little extra room is kind of nice, and that's kind of where we show up.
So then who's the ideal customer? Like, or do you have an ideal customer? Like, I guess it depends who you define as the customer. Like, who's paying? How do they find you?
The person that actually uses Tuple is almost always a developer. The person that pays the bills often ends up being higher up in the org. So a model that we see a lot for adoption of Tuple is that a few engineers will sign up and try it, and then the app kind of starts spreading within the org. And we get a few more engineers and a few more engineers, and then the monthly bill starts going up, and someone goes, I don't want this on my credit card anymore. Let's ask the boss if we can put it on their credit card. And so we end up sometimes talking to, or even sometimes not even talking to, but end up on the credit card of a director or a VP or something like that.
So the first developer signs up, puts their company card in. The second developer joins and just adds on to that existing team. Is that how it typically works?
Exactly. Yep. That was one of the core decisions we made early on, was like, we're going to be basically grouped into teams. The ideal customer of Tuple is, a team of engineers, not a single person. Right. So that's how billing is associated too. There's probably an enormous refactoring in our future of like an organization that then has sub teams.
Right.
And maybe all the billing rolls up or something unbelievably complicated.
I feel like every SaaS app goes through that.
Yes.
Yeah. So how are you defining enterprise sales? Is it like as soon as the director puts in their credit card, now this is an enterprise sales deal and it has kind of a different motion? Or what do you even define enterprise sales as?
Yeah, so we do have a separate enterprise plan. The biggest differentiator is SSO support. So it's kind of the classic thing that separates out larger, more sophisticated organizations. People actually just sort of raise their hand and will contact us somehow or email sales and be like, hey, can I get a quote for 40 seats? Or like, can I get someone to hop on a call and tell me about the enterprise plan or something of that nature? Sometimes they don't need SSO support and don't want to pay the extra. And so for us, it's kind of like, do they want to talk to us? So something like 75% of our revenue actually comes from people that don't talk to us. Right. They sign up themselves, they enter a credit card, they're off to the races, and we hear from them if they have problems. But then another chunk just knows they need to talk to us and they need us to do things for them to help them buy.
is there also the segment of people that want to talk to you because you reached out to them initially?
No, we actually do no outbound right now.
Gotcha.
Everything is inbound. I do things like this podcast and my podcast and Twitter stuff and, various things. So between me and word of mouth, we get enough inbound that we haven't done any outbound stuff yet.
Got it. And then in the bucket that is inbound, do you notice certain customers starting to ramp up the number of people on their team and, politely nudge them, hey, maybe the enterprise plan is for you?
That is an opportunity that I feel like we have not taken advantage of yet. I would give us a C- on our capitalization on the existing leads that we have, maybe even a D. Sometimes large companies will sign up or there'll be a lot of expansion on a certain team, and sometimes I'll notice it and reach out to them and sometimes not. But there's no one whose job it is right now to do that. That is on my list of things to fix.
Zooming out a little bit, why did you start doing enterprise sales? You could have easily said, hey, you know what? Like, a lot of our business is coming from word of mouth. People are self-serving. That's great. Let's just double down on the self-serve part of this. What made you make that leap? For example, your time is finite, right? And so you could have doubled down on the marketing piece as opposed to spending time on the enterprise sales piece.
Money? It's kind of irresponsible in a way. Or like, we'd be building a smaller, less successful business with less impressive customers if we didn't agree to do some of this sales work. And because we're small, it's falling to the founders right now. But this is a problem that millions of businesses have solved, which is that someone should be. It's sales. Like the answer's already figured out, and so we're just doing that part now, which is okay. We're going to build a sales organization, or at least have a few salespeople, or even just one, maybe, who knows, to do this work for us.
And just for completeness, would anything have made you stop? Like, obviously, if the money wasn't coming in, but anything else that would have affected your organization or the way you build your product?
I guess it always comes down to the ROI and the trade-offs. I've discovered that during the enterprise sales process, when we just say no to people, sometimes it just turns out okay. So part of me wonders still, what would happen if we just said no to this? I still think probably 15% of them would probably still close, but the 85% is a lot of money and impressive companies that we would like to serve.
Interesting. What's the most surprising thing you've learned with these conversations that you're having with these customers?
So I'm an engineer, or at least sort of was before I became CEO of this thing, and my brain wants things to be very efficient and not have duplicated work, the most expedited version possible. And so in the early days, I was kind of distraught about sales because it was so inefficient. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm sort of doing project management for a procurement person at another company to help them buy this thing. And so in the early days, I kept thinking, how do I make this more scalable? How do I fix this process for them so that we don't have to do all these things? And I discovered two things. One is that you sort of mostly can't fix it. There's some institutional inertia that you can't really overcome, or they have certain rules or certain processes, and it's some of those things just have to happen. And so I kind of resign myself to certain things in the process, just being yep, we just need humans in the loop. I can't write enough code to make this run itself. But also, I discovered that things are pretty negotiable most of the time. A lot of things are. So a thing that was particularly challenging for me, or that I just didn't really like, was filling out security audits. And so I would get these bespoke Excel spreadsheets with hundreds of questions, how do you verify the identity of visitors coming into your data center? And I'm I don't know, ask Amazon, I guess.
Right.
And so it was oh, this is terrible. I don't want to do this. And so I put together a pretty comprehensive security page on our website. And so we always start with that now. So people will say our security team has some questions, and I'll say, check out tuple.app/security. There's 5,000 words and diagrams on that page of how we do security and an FAQ. And what I usually say to people when they send me a bespoke questionnaire is we're pretty swamped right now. It would be hard for us to do this. Can you have them take a look at this page? And if they have any questions left over, just let me know. And 60% of the time, they just say yes, and that's okay. Right. I guess the sort of broad takeaway for me was, by default, there's a purchasing process, and it has 20 checkboxes on it. And if you just give the person everything they ask for, they're going to ask you for the 20 things on the checklist. Right. But you can also push back on them. And sometimes you can just say no, and they'll go, all right, well, it turns out this was optional after all. Or I talked to whoever over in IT, and they said, sure, yeah, just let them do it.
Right. Do they ever say, no, we really need this? And you're like, okay, just kidding. I'll fill out your form.
Yeah. Sometimes people say, okay, well, we really need like this page filled out.
I see.
The ask almost always shrinks after I say that. Okay, well, this section is really the most important. If you can just do this, like, okay, sure, we can.
So you get to really the core of the issue. So you mentioned the negotiation. What are the levers in your sales motion? Where can you give up some stuff? Where do you want to get something from them?
It's process stuff I find can be somewhat negotiable. I'm slowly learning some of the sales tricks, which are like, I think fairly obvious to experienced people, but as someone coming into it from the outside has been interesting. Like, well, if we're going through all this negotiation, why don't we just change this 1-year agreement to a 2-year agreement or a 3-year agreement?
Right. So
that we don't have to do this again. Or if we're going to stick at 1 year, why don't we just throw an auto renew clause in here that says it's going to renew, and also the price is going to go up 5%, and we just agree now. And by default, unless you send us an email, we're just going to do this again. So that can be like a nice thing. I've come down on price in the past to do longer deals, which is actually kind of win-win because the marginal cost of software is kind of nothing, and so it's like, well, at the end of the day, all deals are profitable for us effectively, like close to any number is profit. And so we want that number as high as it can be, of course, but if coming down makes our lives easier in other ways, like longer agreements, auto renew, elevator clause, that kind of thing, that's like a good trade.
Got it. And so who are you typically making these trades with? Like who are the stakeholders involved? Do you have a typical profile of the org?
Usually, smaller customers don't negotiate anything. They just self-serve, and it's fine. Medium, we might be talking to a director of engineering sometimes because they'll be managing their own budget, and they'll say, I have this much in the budget, or like, I compare you to this other tool, and I'd like you to sort of be in the same ballpark as them. Can you do anything for me on price? So we'll be actually talking to engineering folks. But most of the people that raise their hand for enterprise types pricing, usually by that point, the engineers have tried the app because we have a free trial and they've decided they like it. And this procurement person has more or less been tasked with getting this deal done and purchasing the software. There is negotiation at the biggest companies where they're sort of like trained and possibly compensated or evaluated on their ability to get discounts or other concessions from us. And so there is some back and forth in those situations. But it's almost not negotiation at that point. It's kind of like, you want this, we're going to find a deal structure or a set of terms that works for both sides.
Yeah, when I started doing enterprise sales, the procurement person was the role that kind of surprised me the most, where it was like, I'm incentivized to get not the lowest price. I'm actually incentivized to get the biggest percentage discount off your list price. And the sort of engineer hack in me was like, well, I'll just change my list price. And now you can have an 80% discount if you want, and everyone's happy. Yeah. And it's such a perverse set of incentives, but super interesting when I learned it. I guess that is interesting that the customers that you are selling to have in some way already bought. They're already bought in, they're ready to go. Now it's just like, how do we implement this within our company's policies? I guess that would be one major thing that would change for you if you were to start doing outbound. Does that interest you at all? Or are you like, no, you know what, that's not at all. Okay.
So like, it's probably a blind spot for me. As a developer and as now like a CEO, I get a lot of cold pitches for things. And I find them pretty lame most of the time. Maybe 1 in 20 is kind of well-researched and actually something I might want to buy. But even then, I can't remember ever one of those working. If it's ever worked, it's less than 3 times. And then also, the model we see where people adopt Tuple is almost invariably bottom-up. So it starts with the developers and they try it. I don't think we've ever seen a situation where it starts at the top. Like the CTO goes, we're going to do remote pair programming, and I've chosen Tuple as our tool for that. Here's the account I bought for everyone. So far, it's just always been, there's a groundswell of people using this, and then we're talking to the CTO. Right. And I don't think a good CTO would even try to mandate a tool like that. I think that would be a pretty disastrous thing. And so, like, I don't really want more of that email out there, and I don't really think people should buy our software that way, and so it's just not that I'm interested in pushing.
I guess there is a spectrum. On the one hand, it's purely bottoms up, and you do the enterprise sales motion when they're fully bought in, ready to go. They know 40 people on their team want it. And on the other end of the spectrum, they've never heard of you. And you're trying to convince them that not only should they use Tuple, but also pair programming is good. And you have to convince them of that. Those are the two extremes, but there is something in the middle where maybe one or two developers adopt it in a team. And you go, oh, these two developers are from company X. And I know company X has $100 million in funding. Let me go find the director of engineering and let me ping them and tell them like, hey, two of your developers are already using this. Have you considered rolling it out? Is that sort of a motion you're thinking?
I do actually think that could be really good for us. And I might not even say like go ping the VP of engineering, but maybe it's like talk to those two developers and maybe incentivize them like, hey, can we send you a T-shirt or something if like if you referred a couple people, or like, is there anyone else at your organization that you think might like this, like that you want to send an invite to, where we can comp them some time or something like that. I do think we have a lot of opportunity for that warm lead kind of expansion type revenue, not just purely cold.
It's almost like those first two developers are almost your outside sales team, a sales team that kind of works for you. And if you can, give them the best possible experience, they kind of do the selling for you.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I do like that.
So speaking of sales team, what is Tuple's sales team, or is there a sales team, and what would you like it to be?
Yeah. Today the sales team is me. It's one of the hats I wear, with some assistance from my co-founder, Joel, who handles a lot of the operations. I'm trying to hire an account executive right now. We have, like I said, a bunch of people raising their hands saying, hey, we want to buy this. Please help us. And like you pointed out, we have a good amount of opportunity beyond that of just like, does anyone notice that very large company.com just signed up yesterday and like has 3 people there? Let's make sure they're getting a lot of love. Or like we have high value trials, expansion opportunities. So I'm looking to hire an account exec to handle those type of things. I'm working on that right now. I would be happy to have more people apply to that, especially from your audience.
What's the profile of this person? You're selling a very technical product, but is the sales process mostly non-technical and just sort of going through the organization? Or?
Like I said, it's kind of mostly mechanical at this point. It's sort of like it's the sales, closing the deals part is mostly dealing with procurement, not engineering. So it wouldn't have to be a technical person. It wouldn't hurt if they had some technical background, because sometimes we are talking with engineers or heads of engineering or things like that, and the tool is technical.
But it does seem like somebody that would excel in this role as you try to get to sort of bigger and bigger companies. It does seem like that there are some interesting problems for them to tackle. It's like, how do you navigate these engineering organizations, especially the really large ones? Like, what does Coca-Cola's engineering organization look like? Because it's not the typical Bay Area Silicon Valley startup. There must be some interesting challenges for an account executive.
I think there's a ton of untapped potential. We're doing millions of dollars a year in revenue right now on the back of my limited sales skills and a self-serve funnel. And the enterprise sales piece has been growing and is real money. I mean, we're closing 6-figure deals. We're getting renewals at 6 figures, multiple year deals too. And so there's real revenue opportunity there for sure. We have Fortune 500 companies signing up trials, sometimes multiple, and like there's a lot of expansion opportunity in there. There's just a lot of low-hanging fruit, I guess, is sort of the interesting part to me. We're not plugging you into an existing system where everything has already been decided and figured out. There's a lot that could be done here that will probably work.
Right. That sounds like a great opportunity. And I have to ask, what's your software stack? Or do you use any software to manage your sales process?
Right now we use Pipedrive.
Cool. And how have you found the tools?
It's fine, I would say. It hasn't blown me away. There is a fair amount of like, I already did this thing, but now I need to go tell the CRM I did this thing.
Right. And
like schedule the next thing and, oh, I actually sent that email, but it doesn't know I sent that email and that kind of deal. Right. So it's a bit of a pain. It's often a bit out of date.
Yeah, the tool no longer has the source of truth. You end up not trusting the tool and just falling back on, whatever you're using before, email or calendar or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, great. I mean, this has been super insightful. Thanks so much for hanging out and chatting. And I think it's actually really useful for our audience. I'm glad you came by.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm glad we could help. And if you're someone who might be our next account executive, please hit us up at tuple.app/jobs.